All right, today we're going to take a look at one single powerful moment in history, the mocking of Christ. But here's the thing. We're not just looking at it as some event that happened ages ago. Nope. We're going to explore it through three totally different lenses. First, through the words of Scripture itself. Then, we'll see how Renaissance art transformed it. And finally, we'll connect it to a really powerful prophecy about the city of Jerusalem itself. It's going to be quite a journey.
So, where do we start? Well, let's zoom in on one really specific, kind of strange detail that, honestly, unlocks this whole story. If you look at the gospel accounts of Jesus' trial, right in the middle of all the chaos and the violence, his captors do something very specific. They blindfold him. So the question is, why? Why a blindfold?
You might think, okay, it's just to humiliate him, right? But this simple act, something that artists and writers have obsessed over for centuries, it was way more than that. It was actually a direct challenge, a symbolic taunt aimed right at the heart of who he claimed to be.
Okay, so what was really going on? Well, according to biblical scholars, this blindfold was part of a twisted, sadistic game. See, they'd cover his eyes and then they'd hit him, and they'd taunt him, shouting, "Prophesy, who struck you?" Get it? They were mocking his claim to be a prophet. They were basically saying, if you're so divine, prove it. Tell us who hit you without seeing. It turned his suffering into this cruel public test. And this wasn't some random act of violence, it was a kind of ritualized humiliation. A lot like these nasty king games that Roman soldiers were known to play with their prisoners.
But here's where it gets really fascinating. For the early Christians looking back on this, it wasn't just a brutal random act. Not at all. They saw it as the fulfillment of a prophecy from centuries before. The prophet Isaiah had written about a suffering servant who, and I quote, "did not hide my face from scorn and spitting." So for them, this horrible moment of mockery was destiny. It was prophecy coming true right before their eyes. And the irony here is just, wow, it's so thick you could cut it with a knife. Think about it. The guards are covering the eyes of the man people called the light of the world. By trying to physically blind him, they were basically acting out their own spiritual blindness. They just couldn't see what was really happening right in front of them. Okay, so we have this intense, symbolic moment from the scriptures. Now let's switch gears and see how that one detail, that blindfold, gets transformed into a breathtaking masterpiece of art. And this wasn't art for a big public gallery. No, this was something created for a very different purpose: quiet, personal prayer.
So I want you to picture this. We're not in some grand, bustling museum. We're in a tiny, quiet room, a monk's cell, actually, cell number 7 in the convent of San Marco in Florence. And it's here that an artist who was also a monk named Fra Angelico painted this very scene, for one person, for a fellow monk to look at while he prayed.
This all happened around the year 1440. And you have to understand, this was a time of incredible energy at the convent. The famous Medici family, yeah, that Medici family, was pouring money into a huge renovation. And Fra Angelico? He got the gig of a lifetime. He was tasked with painting the whole place, everything from the big public spaces down to each and every one of these small, private cells.
And this is where Fra Angelico does something truly remarkable. See, he wasn't just painting a picture of a story. He was creating a tool for meditation. And to do that, he made a pretty radical choice in how he painted it. Okay, so you'd expect to see a big, chaotic crowd, right? The Gospels talk about a throng of jeering soldiery. But Fra Angelico, he does the complete opposite. He gets rid of the crowd entirely. Instead, all you see are these disembodied parts, a hand slapping him, another hand pressing down the crown of thorns, and this one crude-looking head just spitting. The soldiers themselves are gone. They're just symbols of the terrible things they did. So what's the point of doing that? Well, it's absolutely brilliant. By stripping away all the noise and the chaos of the crowd, Fra Angelico makes you, the viewer, focus on just one thing: the spiritual meaning of Christ's suffering. There's no distraction. It's designed to put the monk praying in front of it into a deep, contemplative state. It was all about creating what people back then called the perfect movement for the contemplative soul.
And hey, take a look at the two figures at the bottom of the painting. This is also key. They aren't even really watching what's happening to Jesus. You've got Mary, who's clearly sad, but she has one hand raised, accepting God's will. And then there's St. Dominic, the guy who founded the order of monks here, and his back is turned. He's completely lost in a book, reading the very scriptures that predicted this would happen. They're not just watching, they're showing the monk how to pray.
They're modeling the exact kind of deep meditation this painting is supposed to create.
Okay, so we've seen how this one moment, the mocking of Christ, is all tangled up with prophecy and God's will, both in the Bible and in art. Now, I want you to take that idea of prophecy and we're going to zoom way, way out. We're going to shift from ancient history and Renaissance art to something else entirely: eschatology, which is, the study of the end times, the final events of all human history.
And to do that, we're going to turn to a completely different source. But it also talks about prophecy, about a promised return, and about the ultimate destiny of the city of Jerusalem.
The book we're looking at now is called Jerusalem in the Quran, and it's by a scholar named Imran Hossein, and he makes a really compelling case. He argues that the Quran itself actually contains the key to understanding what's happening today, right now, in the Holy Land, and that these modern events are all part of a divine plan for the end of the world.
Now, his whole argument really centers on one specific verse in the Quran, and it says this. It talks about a certain people from a town that God destroyed, and it says these people are forbidden to ever return to that town until something very specific happens. And that something is the release of these mysterious forces called Gog and Magog, who will then, quote, spread out in every direction. So according to Hussein's interpretation, what's this unnamed town? It's Jerusalem. And so he concludes that the return of the Jewish people to the Holy Land in our lifetime, well, that is the fulfillment of this very prophecy. It's the sign that the until has happened. The conditions for their return have been met.
And you really got to pay attention here, because this is the critical part. In this interpretation, this fulfillment is not seen as a good thing. It's not a sign of divine favor. Instead, it's seen as a signal, a sign that the final dramatic act in the story of the world has officially begun.
So from this point of view, what does that mean? It means that Gog and Magog, which Hussein believes is basically a modern godless civilization that now dominates the world, have made this return possible. And because of that, the event isn't a blessing. It's part of a huge, elaborate deception, all run by a figure from Islamic tradition known as the Dajjal, or the false Messiah. And all of this is setting the stage, not for some golden age, but for the end of history and a final massive divine punishment.
And the book points to one last very physical sign to watch out for, something tied directly to these end times. It brings up an Islamic prophecy that says a key event, the return of Jesus, the true Messiah, is set to happen when the Sea of Galilee, which is a vital source of water for the whole region, is just about to run completely dry. So look at where we've been. We started with a blindfold in a dusty courtyard, an act of humiliation that becomes a sign of ancient prophecy. Then we went to a quiet monk's cell, where a painter turned that same violence into a beautiful tool for prayer. And we end with a modern prophecy that sees the entire history of Jerusalem as a sign that the world is about to end. One story, one place, seen in three completely different ways. It just goes to show you, right? The meaning of an event isn't just about what happened. It's about the lens you're given to see it through.